Michael Davis, the CEO of a modest restaurant chain with 12 locations, had worked tirelessly to build his business over the last decade. His mission was simple: create a welcoming, family-friendly environment that everyone could enjoy. But lately, something felt off. Customer complaints about long wait times and unfriendly staff had begun to pile up, and employee turnover had reached an all-time high. Despite reassurances from his regional managers that everything was fine, Michael felt the reports didn't reflect the whispers he had been hearing. Determined to uncover the truth, Michael decided to go undercover at one of his own restaurants. He chose a diner located in a quiet suburban area, a 2-hour drive from his corporate office. This location was far enough from the corporate center that no one would recognize him. Most of the staff had never met him in person. To blend in, Michael grew out a scruffy beard, swapped his usual suits for a worn-out hoodie and jeans, and put on a pair of thick glasses. He looked nothing like the polished CEO who graced the company website. The diner was bustling with activity as he entered, the clatter of dishes and hum of conversation filling the air. The space was clean but dated, with booths that showed their age. It wasn't a disaster, but it wasn't the cozy, welcoming place Michael had envisioned when he first started the company. A young waitress approached Michael's table with a forced smile. Her name tag read Rosa, and her eyes appeared tired, as if she had been working non-stop for hours. Despite her exhaustion, she greeted him warmly, though there was a noticeable strain in her voice. "Hi there, welcome. Can I get you something to drink?" she asked. Michael noticed faint bags under her eyes, and her smile didn't reach them. Something about her seemed off, but he chose to let it go for now. "Just coffee, please," Michael replied, settling into a booth near the window. Rosa nodded, quickly moving away to serve another customer. He watched as she navigated the busy floor with remarkable efficiency, refilling drinks, clearing tables, and placing orders. She was clearly overworked, but she maintained a professional demeanor, never showing her frustration to the customers. When Rosa returned with his coffee, Michael ordered a burger and fries. As she wrote down his order, a sharp voice from the kitchen cut through the air. "Rosa, what's taking so long? You're falling behind again." The voice belonged to a short, stocky man in his 40s, wearing a stained apron. Michael guessed he was the shift manager, though he hadn't introduced himself when Michael had arrived. Rosa flinched at the harsh tone but quickly nodded. "I'm sorry, I'll be right with you," she called back, her voice shaking slightly. Michael frowned as he sipped his coffee, watching Rosa continue to work tirelessly. He'd built this business on the idea that employees should feel valued, not belittled, especially in front of customers. As he waited for his meal, he overheard bits and pieces of conversations from the other tables. A family behind him complained about waiting too long for their food, and 2 teenagers whispered about how rude the manager had been to their waitress earlier. The atmosphere in the diner was far from the friendly, welcoming environment Michael had hoped for when he first opened his restaurants. When Rosa finally brought out his burger, she apologized for the delay, her voice barely audible. "I'm really sorry for the wait," she murmured, avoiding eye contact. "No worries," Michael replied with a reassuring smile. "You're doing great." Rosa's eyes flicked up in surprise, and for a moment, she gave him a small, genuine smile before hurrying off again. Michael barely had time to take a bite of his burger when he heard a muffled sob coming from the kitchen. His fork froze halfway to his mouth. It was Rosa's voice. Michael sat still, straining to listen. "I'm doing everything I can. I haven't had a break in 6 hours." Rosa's voice cracked, thick with emotion. The manager's voice was sharp and dismissive. "If you can't handle the pressure, maybe you're in the wrong job. We don't have time for excuses." The sound of Rosa's sobs grew louder. Michael's stomach turned as he set his fork down, his heart heavy with what he was hearing. Without thinking, he stood up and made his way toward the kitchen door. As Michael stepped into the kitchen, the sight before him tightened his chest. Rosa stood in the corner, her hands trembling as she wiped tears away with the back of her sleeve. The manager, a man named Rick, stood over her, arms crossed, his face twisted with frustration. 2 cooks in the corner looked away, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to step in. Michael clenched his fists, his heart racing. This wasn't the company he had built. Is there a problem here? Michael's voice was calm but firm, causing Rick to turn in surprise. No. Just a little miscommunication, Rick stammered, trying to brush off the situation. Rosa, still wiping her eyes, whispered, I'm sorry. I'm trying my best. Michael's eyes shifted between Rosa and Rick. He hadn't revealed his identity yet, so he kept his tone measured. She looks like she needs a break, he said quietly. Why don't you let her sit down for a few minutes? Rick scoffed, clearly irritated. We're short-staffed. No time for breaks during the rush. Michael's jaw tightened. There's always time to treat people with respect. The tension in the room was thick as Michael held Rick's gaze. For a long moment, Rick said nothing. But then one of the cooks, a nervous-looking young man named Sam, spoke up. Rosa's been working non-stop since she clocked in. She hasn't even had a chance to grab a drink of water. Rick turned sharply on Sam, his face darkening. Stay out of it, Sam. Focus on your station. Michael's gaze shifted from Rick to Sam and back again. And who's responsible for making sure the team can actually focus? From where I'm standing, it seems like the pressure is coming from how this place is being run. Rick's face flushed red, but he didn't respond right away. Michael's eyes didn't leave him. Look, I'm just doing my job. If people can't handle it, that's not on me, Rick muttered, clearly trying to salvage the situation. Michael's voice grew firmer. We'll see about that. Rosa, her face still flushed from crying, looked at Michael, confusion and a glimmer of gratitude in her eyes. I'll be fine, she whispered, though her voice wavered. Michael gently stopped her as she tried to leave. Take 5, he said softly. You've earned it. Rick started to protest, but Michael held up a hand, his tone unyielding. She's taking a break now. Rosa hesitated, glancing nervously between Michael and Rick. After a moment, she nodded and slipped past the swinging kitchen doors. Michael turned back to face Rick, his tone now cold and measured. What's your name? Rick, the manager replied, his voice defensive. Rick, Michael repeated. How long have you been managing here? About 2 years, Rick answered, folding his arms. I've kept this place running fine, so I don't need some random customer telling me how to do my job. Michael's gaze hardened. This is far from fine. Michael took a deep breath, trying to keep his composure as he faced Rick. The air between them felt thick with tension. Rick's defiance was palpable, but Michael knew he couldn't back down now. The behavior he had witnessed, both towards Rosa and his staff in general, was unacceptable. You might want to think about how you're treating people, Michael said, his voice even but firm. Because from where I'm standing, the way this place is being run is what's causing all the issues. Rick's face flushed again, and for a moment, his bravado slipped. He opened his mouth to say something but was interrupted by the sharp sound of the kitchen doors swinging open. Rosa reappeared, her face slightly more composed than before, though she still looked exhausted. She kept her head down as she walked past Rick and returned to the dining area. Michael made a decision. He wasn't done here, not by a long shot. I'll handle this, Michael said quietly, his eyes still locked on Rick. I'll be back in a minute. Rick glared at him but said nothing, watching Michael walk out of the kitchen and back into the dining area. Back at his booth, Michael's mind was already racing. He needed to make changes. Big changes. He finished his meal in silence, observing how Rosa continued to serve with quiet professionalism, despite the weight of everything she'd been through. Every movement was slower now, but she still managed to smile at customers and ensure they felt taken care of. Rick remained in the kitchen, barking orders at his team, casting a shadow over the kitchen and making the atmosphere tense once more. Michael was done being passive. He was ready to make his move. After finishing his meal, Michael called for the check, his voice calm as he asked for it. Rosa brought it over, still looking a little fragile but managing to put on a soft smile. Thanks for stopping by. Sorry again for earlier, she said quietly, her words barely above a whisper. No need to apologize, Michael replied, his tone warm yet firm. You're doing great. Rosa's cheeks flushed slightly, and she offered him a genuine, albeit small, smile before walking away. As Michael stood up, he made a mental note of everything he had witnessed. He wasn't done here yet. He was just getting started. Before he left, he glanced back at the dining area one last time. Rosa was refilling a customer's coffee, her movements careful but efficient. In the kitchen, Rick was still barking orders at his team. Michael felt a surge of frustration rise within him as he pushed open the door and stepped outside. Pulling out his phone, he dialed his assistant, Janet. Janet, clear my schedule for tomorrow, Michael said, his voice resolute, and get me everything you have on the staff at the suburban location. Employee files, performance reviews, all of it. Got it, Janet replied without hesitation. Anything else? Michael glanced back at the diner, his mind already working on his next steps. Yeah, he said. Make sure my regional managers are ready for a meeting. We need to talk. Michael hung up and slid into his car, his thoughts already turning to the future. Tomorrow wasn't just about observing, it was about taking action. The next morning, Michael arrived at the diner just after it opened, wearing the same scruffy disguise as the day before. This time, he carried a small notebook in his pocket and a renewed sense of determination. He wasn't here just to observe anymore. He was here to fix things. The morning shift was quieter, giving Michael a chance to observe without the usual chaos of the lunch rush. Rosa was already on the floor, moving with deliberate care, though her exhaustion was more evident than the day before. Her smile was thin, but she still managed to be kind to the few customers trickling in. Rick was nowhere to be seen, but Connor, a new cook who had been working at the diner for just a few months, was in the kitchen, prepping ingredients. Michael watched for a while, his mind ticking over the issues he had seen the day before. Rosa was still carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders, and the restaurant was still running under the strain of an overworked, underappreciated staff. Eventually, Rosa walked past his booth with a coffee pot, and Michael decided it was time to speak with her. Hey, Rosa, he said casually, his tone light. Do you have a second? She hesitated, glancing at the few customers scattered around the diner. Sure, but I can't stay long, we're short-staffed again. I won't keep you, Michael assured her, leaning forward slightly. I just wanted to ask, how long have you been working here? Rosa blinked in surprise at the question, clearly caught off guard. About 8 months, she replied. Why? Michael studied her for a moment, then lowered his voice just slightly. You seem like you're carrying a lot on your shoulders. Is it always this busy? Rosa hesitated, her eyes flicking nervously toward the kitchen. It's not always the customers, she began, but then trailed off, clearly unsure how much she should say. Sometimes it's... Rick. Michael nodded. I thought so. Rosa's head snapped up, her expression alarmed. I shouldn't be talking about this, but... Yeah, it's been hard, she said in a low voice, glancing back toward the kitchen to make sure no one could overhear. I know Rick's under a lot of pressure too, but he's making it worse. Michael stayed silent for a moment, letting her words sink in. He needed to hear more. What about Connor? Michael asked. He seems like he tries to help. Rosa's expression softened slightly, and she nodded. Connor's great. He's only been here a few months, but he's one of the few people who actually cares. He covers for people when they're struggling. Honestly, if it weren't for him, I probably would have quit by now. Before Michael could ask any more questions, the kitchen door swung open, and Rick stepped out, immediately shifting the energy in the room. Rosa tensed up and quickly excused herself to refill a customer's coffee. Rick, completely unaware of the conversation, started barking orders at Connor, who silently nodded as he continued his work. Michael's jaw tightened as he watched this. The situation was clear. It wasn't just stress. It was a pattern, and it wasn't going to continue on his watch. As Michael watched Rick bark more orders at Connor, his resolve hardened. This situation couldn't go on any longer. The restaurant had been operating under a cloud of tension for far too long. He needed to take decisive action. A few moments later, the first incident of the day occurred. A customer, an older man in a flannel shirt, flagged Rosa down, upset about his eggs being overcooked. Rosa, as always, apologized and offered to have the kitchen remake them, trying to keep the situation under control. "Can you just do your job right the first time?" the man grumbled, making it clear he wasn't happy. Rosa flushed, but she remained composed. "I'm really sorry about that. I'll get it fixed right away." However, Rick overheard the conversation and stormed out of the kitchen, visibly irritated. "What's the problem here?" he demanded, glaring at Rosa. The customer waved him off, trying to calm the situation. "It's fine. She's handling it." But Rick was having none of it. "How many times do I have to tell you to double-check the orders before they go out? This is basic stuff." Michael couldn't hold back any longer. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor, drawing everyone's attention. "That's enough," Michael said, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. Rick turned to him, his face twisted in annoyance. "Who the hell do you think you are?" Michael didn't hesitate. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his company ID, and flipped it open. "I'm Michael Davis," he said, locking eyes with Rick. "I own this diner and 12 others just like it." The room fell silent. Rosa froze mid-step. Connor, the cook, peeked out from the kitchen. Even the customers seemed to hold their breath as they watched the confrontation unfold. Rick's face turned pale, then flushed red. I didn't realize," Rick muttered, clearly flustered. Michael didn't give him a chance to recover. "No, you didn't. Because if you had, you wouldn't be treating my staff like this, or my customers." Rick opened his mouth to argue, but Michael cut him off. "Let's talk in the back," Michael said sharply, motioning toward the office. Rick hesitated for a moment, then, realizing he had no choice, nodded stiffly and walked toward the kitchen. Michael followed him, his expression set in determination. Once inside the office, Michael shut the door behind him, leaving the clamor of the diner and the kitchen behind. The tension between him and Rick was palpable. Michael was done with the excuses. He had seen enough. "Do you have any idea how out of line you've been?" Michael asked, his voice low but firm. Rick looked away, but Michael wasn't letting up. "You've been with this company for 2 years, Rick. In that time, you've managed to create a toxic environment for your team. Do you have any idea what that does to morale, to customer service, to the business?" Rick didn't answer immediately. He shifted uneasily, clearly uncomfortable under Michael's intense scrutiny. Finally, he mumbled, "I get it." Michael took a deep breath, his voice unwavering. "This job isn't easy, but that doesn't give you the right to treat people the way you have. Not Rosa. Not any of them." Rick opened his mouth to speak, but Michael held up a hand, silencing him. "I've seen enough. You're done here." Rick's face went pale, and his eyes widened. "Wait, what?" "I'm letting you go, effective immediately," Michael said, his voice final. Rick took a step back, as if the words had physically knocked him back. He shook his head in disbelief. "You can't." "I can and I will," Michael replied firmly. "I'll make sure HR processes your severance package, but you're no longer part of this company." Rick stood frozen for a moment, his eyes darting from Michael to the door. Finally, he nodded stiffly and walked out of the office without another word. Michael exhaled, his shoulders sagging slightly with the weight of the decision. He didn't relish firing anyone, but he knew it was the right thing to do. This kind of behavior had no place in his business. When Michael stepped back into the dining area, all eyes turned to him. Rosa and Connor were standing near the kitchen, both looking at him with a mix of shock and cautious hope. The atmosphere was tense, but there was a palpable sense that something had shifted in the air. Michael took a deep breath and addressed the room. "I want to thank everyone for their hard work today," he began, his voice steady and clear. "Things are going to change around here, starting today." He paused for a moment, making eye contact with Rosa and Connor. "Rosa, Connor, meet me after your shift. We need to talk." The tension in the room started to ease, replaced by a buzz of curiosity and relief. Michael could feel the shift as people realized that, perhaps, things would finally get better. For the first time in a while, he felt like he was steering the company in the right direction. The rest of the day went by in a blur. Michael continued to observe the team, noting how Rosa and Connor worked tirelessly to keep the restaurant running, despite the challenges. He also saw how the atmosphere improved slightly without Rick's oppressive presence hanging over everyone. By the end of the shift, the diner felt different. There was a renewed sense of purpose among the staff, even if it was just the beginning of the change Michael had promised. As the last customers finished their meals and the lights dimmed in the dining area, Rosa and Connor stood awkwardly by the counter, waiting for Michael to speak. Both of them looked exhausted, but there was an undeniable spark of hope in their eyes. Michael motioned for them to sit at a booth near the back. He slid into one side of the booth, while they hesitated before taking the other. He looked at both of them, his expression softening. "First, I want to say thank you," Michael began, his voice sincere. "I know today was tough, especially with everything going on, but you both handled yourselves with professionalism and care. That's more than I can say for some of the leadership this place has had." Rosa and Connor exchanged uncertain glances, unsure of how to respond. Michael's words had hit home, and they knew things were about to change. "I didn't know things had gotten this bad," Michael admitted, his voice softer now. "That's on me. I've been too distant. I built this company to a place where people feel valued, employees and customers alike, and somewhere along the way, I lost sight of that." Rosa hesitated for a moment before speaking up. Her voice was quiet, but there was an undeniable sincerity in it. "It's not all bad," she said softly. "I mean, I've worked worse jobs, but it's been hard. I love the customers, though. I just wish." She trailed off, unsure whether she should say more. Michael leaned in slightly, his eyes kind. "You just wish it felt like someone cared, right?" he asked gently. Rosa nodded, her eyes welling up just a little, but she quickly wiped the tears away. Michael turned his gaze to Connor, who had been quietly listening. "And you, Connor? What's kept you here?" Connor looked up, his expression serious. "Honestly, I didn't plan on staying long, but I couldn't leave, not with how much Rosa and the others have to deal with. Someone needs to have their back." Michael's chest tightened as he listened to them both. These two were the backbone of the diner, doing everything they could to keep things afloat despite the dysfunction around them. They were the kind of employees he had envisioned when starting his company. Loyal, hardworking, and caring for the customers and each other. "I've been relying on reports and spreadsheets," Michael said, his voice low with regret. "I've been too disconnected from what's really happening here, and that ends now." He took a breath before continuing, his tone firm with resolve. "Here's what's going to happen. First, I'm bringing in a new manager, someone with experience, but also someone who knows how to lead with respect, not fear." Rosa's eyes widened in surprise. "You mean, you're not going to keep Rick?" "No," Michael said, his voice strong. "Rick isn't coming back." The weight of those words seemed to lift off Rosa and Connor. A sense of relief spread across the table, though they both still looked a little stunned. "Second," Michael continued, "I'm revisiting the staffing structure. No more being short-staffed during peak hours. We're going to hire more people, and I'll make sure everyone gets proper breaks. You can't take care of customers if you're running on empty." Rosa smiled slightly, a little spark of hope in her eyes. "That would be amazing." Michael smiled back. "It will be. And third, I want to reward both of you for everything you've done to keep this place going. You've shown dedication, leadership, and care, and that deserves recognition." Connor blinked in disbelief. "Wait, what? Reward us? We're just doing our jobs." Michael shook his head. "No, you're doing more than that. Connor, I'm promoting you to assistant manager. You'll get a raise and more consistent hours. You've already been stepping up, and that's what leadership looks like." Connor's jaw dropped. "Wait, are you serious? I've never managed anything before." Michael smiled. "You're already doing it. You've been helping where no one else would." That's what a leader does. Connor shook his head, a mix of shock and gratitude on his face. I don't know what to say. Thank you. Michael turned his attention to Rosa. And Rosa, he said softly, 8 months of dedication, even when things were at their worst. I see how much you care about the customers and your coworkers. You deserve more than just a pat on the back. Rosa looked down, embarrassed, as her eyes filled with tears. I'm just doing my job, she whispered. Michael's voice was gentle but firm. You're doing more than that. Starting next week, I'm giving you a significant pay raise, and I'm setting up a bonus system for the staff, so hard work like yours gets recognized. Rosa's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide. Oh my God, really? Really? Michael said with a smile. You've earned it. As the conversation continued, Michael laid out more of his plans to improve the diner. He promised to update the outdated equipment, implement a better scheduling system, and hold regular meetings with the team to hear their concerns. He wasn't going to let things slip through the cracks again. By the time they finished their conversation, Rosa and Connor seemed lighter, as if the weight of the past months had been lifted. There was a quiet but palpable sense of relief in the air. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of changes. Michael kept his promise, spending several days at the diner, working alongside the staff, listening to their feedback, and showing that he was genuinely invested in their well-being. He personally interviewed candidates for the manager position, eventually hiring a woman named Denise, whose experience and empathetic leadership style quickly won over the team. True to his word, Michael approved raises for both Rosa and Connor and brought in 3 new hires to help ease the workload. The atmosphere in the diner began to transform. Customers noticed the difference too. Service was faster, the staff seemed happier, and the smiles they wore were genuine. One afternoon, as Michael prepared to leave for the corporate office, Rosa stopped him by the door. Hey, she said, smiling warmly. I just wanted to say, this place feels different now. Better. Like it actually matters. Michael smiled, feeling a sense of pride swell in his chest. It does matter, he replied. And so do you. As he walked to his car, Michael felt a sense of pride he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just about profits, growth, or expansion anymore. It was about the people who made it all possible. He wasn't going to forget that again. And as he drove away, he knew that the changes he had started were just the beginning. The diner had a long way to go, but Michael had reignited the heart of his business. The people.